Let's go. Welcome to the Ura Labs podcast. Another episode we have today. Ever complained about how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You will get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability with Satya Shankaran and Nirav Kodolikar. Today on the show, we'll be speaking with Dr. Ashwin Mahesh. He is a polymath who has studied stars in the sky and people on the ground with equal interest. He builds technology for social good and also dabbles in electoral politics and its analysis. He has been instrumental in me quitting the corporate rat race and finding my feet in change making. And he's done that with a lot of others as well. A lot of my working philosophy, for example, has been driven by by my exposure to his thoughts. My theory of change, for example, has been influenced by his thinking around public problem solving. And that three words is what we are going to be talking about today. Welcome to the show, Ashwin.
Well, thank you, Satya. I'm happy to be here. I've been watching earlier episodes of the show, and I thought they were quite nice, and I look forward to this one.
Well, trying to make it interesting is one of the things. Most people take something or the other away from this. But today, this public problem solving is something I wanted to focus on. Has public policy education missed the bus on public problem solving, especially for urban areas? What do you think?
I think, well, missed the bus maybe a little harsh, but they've seen, how it is with buses, right? On a given route, many buses ply. So one could analogously say that they've been sitting at the bus stop watching some buses go by, and they've all got a number plate that says public problem solving, and they're waiting for the public policy bus to come along. And actually what they need to do is get on this bus. They haven't missed the bus, but a few buses have gone by, and there's still an opportunity to get on the next bus that comes along with that name, with that board. I think they're also learning that for themselves. To be fair, it's not like we have a long history of teaching public policy, and therefore if it takes a little while to recognize that. And one should also say that not everybody is going at the same pace in this. There are those who are more proactive in latching on to this, and some others will learn from that experience.
But if let's try and unpack this whole public problem solving itself, how are you approaching public problem solving? Because in most policy education, the markets kind of solve certain kinds of problem. You allow them to bring about products innovations, which then solves a certain particular friction or a problem for the user, and that hence solves most of the other problems. But how is your approach to problem solving, and how is that different? How is this kind of problem solving different from the problem solving you are envisioning?
Okay, so I have a sort of, you're familiar with some of my theories of change, but let me recount them in this way. When we want something to change, and we want it to change reasonably quickly too, not over a long period of time, you have to ask yourself, what are the drivers of that change? What's going to make that happen? Loosely, you could say there are five things, and you have to do these five things simultaneously. And the same group of people have to do these five things together in some way. Those five things, in my mind, are information and advocacy, which is good. You tell people this is the right thing to do, these are the reasons to do it. There's a lot of it. You do that. This podcast is partly about it, right? The second thing is creating a pipeline of innovations to, in some sense, to say what's the next thing in energy, what's the next thing in mobility, what's the next thing in education, what's the next thing in governance. To have that pipeline of continuously emerging new things, to keep alert to that, and to figure out how to engage with that. The third thing is investing time, money, resources of any kind to make those ideas move to acceptance rapidly. So Satya has an idea, and someone Nirav has spotted it. But now it has to move from Nirav spotting it to deployment somewhere, trial somewhere, sandboxing somewhere, all of those kinds of things. So you want, and maybe if it's proving to be even, have half a chance to say, let's put money into this. So you have to bring that. So investing in the future is the third thing. The fourth thing is law, policy, governance, the kind of stuff that you guys are doing with the mobility bills, things like that, right? The fifth thing is what I call proving by doing. Because a lot of people think oh, in 10 years this will be possible, in 20 years this will be possible. We saw that with electric vehicles. Everybody said, well, it can be done in 20 years, it can be 15 years. Or that's transition to renewable energy. Everybody said it'll happen in 30 years, 20. If you want, we can do it day after tomorrow. It's just deciding to do it day after tomorrow, which is in the way, in some case. So I think of these as 5 things that need to be done in order to accelerate any field of any canvas that we want to work on. But within that, you have to have metrics. Right? What should the state do? What should the market do? And what should people do? And these metrics are also important. And I think of the metrics as capacity metrics. Right? These are not outcomes typically that we're going for, because my sense of it is that if I were to pursue outcomes, and especially in project modes, you'd end up with smaller outcomes than otherwise. And let me explain this way. One of the things that I say a lot, and a lot of people sort of now believe it, is that we shouldn't try to solve problems. And if you say only that part, people will say, what nonsense. The whole point of us gathering in various public realms is to solve problems. Yes, but then I say the second half, which is, instead of trying to solve problems, we should try to increase the number of problem-solving people. They will in turn solve problems. But the more important thing today is to increase the number of problem-solving people. There aren't that many people who see themselves as problem solvers, or see their interest as an interest in problem solving. Even those who are interested in public policy, if you go to a typical public policy school and say, why did you join this course? I did this in the last 2 or 3 courses that I taught. I would ask the students, why did you join this course? And invariably, you could reduce their answers to, oh, after taking this course, I can go work on some problem in some government department or a corporate or an NGO. And through that employment, I can try to solve some problems. So they're taking public policy courses to solve problems. But who's teaching them problem solving? Problem solving is a skill too. Problem solving has frameworks. Problem solving has approaches. Complex problem solving is not something that is merely the sum of the tools and the instruments that you learn for problem solving. It's like, in some sense, you say, here's how a spanner works, here's how a screwdriver works, here's how a jack works. Now you're a carpenter. No, actually, carpentry or whatever, plumbing or whatever, any of these kinds of things is not the tools. Tools are important, and skillful use of the tools is critical. But the tools are separate, and actually solving problems is separate. So in a sense, I feel it's useful to ask, how do you teach public problem solving? And that's where a lot of the education needs to go, right?
Okay.
Ordinary citizens, I think what we should do is try to increase the number of problem solving, flat out. But the state can't really increase the number of problem solving people within itself. Of course, it can enable a lot more people outside to become problem solvers if they want to. Some departments occasionally have done that. But what the state should focus on is building for itself the capacity to design and execute a policy. Like, too many departments are going through administrative motions, and they'll tell you this is what they're doing, and often they'll present what they're doing as good things. Take this footpath improvement in the city. Sometimes they'll tell you that some nice thing that they're doing. Let's take Tendashore or the Smart Cities missions footpaths. They will tell you that these are all quote unquote smart. So supposing I give you a choice, I give you 2 bananas and say, here's a smart banana and here's a not smart banana. Which one do you want to eat? And nobody is going to say, well, let me eat the not smart. Everybody is going to say, I'll eat the smart banana. But our municipality is not like that. If you give the municipality a smart banana and a not smart banana, they will most often eat only the not smart banana. And it's not that I'm saying it. They are doing it themselves. They come to me and they say, these are really smart roads. But 99% of our roads are not going to be like this. These roads last longer, they save money, they are more uniform in road width, they're better for pedestrians, but we're not going to do it. Again and again and again, for the last 10, 12 years, they've been telling us, this is smart, we're not going to do it. It doesn't make any sense. And the reason is that even when they do something and call it smart, it's not the result of any policy. It's just they're doing that project. They want to show that it is an intelligent project, that it meets certain metrics and outcomes, and therefore it's smart. right? It's like saying my son wrote the first question in the physics paper really well. Therefore, now he's passed. He didn't go to the chemistry exam. He thought he was not in the biology class. He thought, he went to a different state board entrance exam center. So he is doing all the wrong things everywhere else. But he got the first question in one answer paper right, and they think, okay, now he's passed. That's just not going to work. It's just you have to be able to say this is my policy, and also to be able to defend it in public. Nobody will actually give you an answer if you call up the municipal commissioner or a chief engineer and say, you say that all these roads that you're building, a few dozen roads in a few places, you say that those are smart. Why is it that you are not learning from it yourself and building similar roads elsewhere? That's not a question anybody wants to answer even. It's kind of striking if you think about it. Why would, up until the point that now, unfortunately, what has happened is they go further back. Means now, after a while, they realize that if I go around saying something is smart, people ask, why don't you do it everywhere? And because I don't have an answer to that question, I stop saying that this is smart. So in a sense, the lack of a policy and a commitment to doing things in a particular way and standing up to defend it means that even when you do it right occasionally, you can't actually be a champion for it because even your support for it is marginal and rare. So this is the second thing. The state has to build for itself the capacity to design and execute policy. It's very important to have officials serve for long periods in individual positions. The transfers that we are seeing of the IAS officers in particular, hugely impeding capacity building in government. Most do not understand the domains in which they are called to work. A few are modest enough to say that they recognize it and call upon some outside support. Many are unfamiliar with that approach. Some don't want to do it. There's all kinds of problems. So from the state's point of view, designing and executing a policy, that's what they have to get. Society has to get good at increasing the number of problem-solving people. The markets have to get good at accelerated adoption, is what I would say. Something is good. So let's say conserving water is good. Everybody knows that. The markets have to show that this can be done well, executed well, that there is a return on the investment that one makes in these kinds of things. And so again and again and again, if leaders in the market space, leaders in industry, look for things on which they can demonstrate leadership, which also serve a public purpose. Too often what's happening is people are saying, I'll take care of this park, I'll put my company's board on that and say maintained by Sudhindra or something, just to throw out a name. I don't know anybody called Sudhindra. But you know what I mean. What's so great about taking care of the park? I have a gardener. He can do that, right? The company should be doing something else. The company should be doing something that actually says there's a way to live, a way to work, there's a way to, which is ecologically alert, which is economically efficient, which is equitable. And we're going to show leadership in doing that. So if you take this framework of good products and services, livable things, as I call them, you should be able to say that in this company, we're demonstrating leadership in A, B, C, D, out of those things. Some do, but that's a very small fraction of it. So across state, market, and society, this is what we need. Accelerated adoption of good products, services, and practices in companies, increasing the number of problem-solving people in society, and improving the capacity to design and execute policy in government. So now you got three different frameworks. You can look at any project and say, does it meet any of these frameworks? So somebody comes and says, I want to distribute old clothes to somebody, right? On the face of it, good thing, God bless you, needs to be done. All of that is fine. But does it meet any of these things? It's arguable, right? That it doesn't meet any of these things. On the other hand, you go and say, look, disabled children are not going to school because schools are not inclusive enough. I'm going to train 1,000 teachers in government schools so that government schools can begin to work with children who otherwise would not go to school. And this policy of saying, learn at home, don't come to school if you're disabled, that should be changed. So now you've got a different framework, right? One is the state saying this policy that we need to adopt is very sharp. It says what needs to be done in a certain way for a reason that we are willing to stand behind. Now we have to work towards achieving that. How do we execute that? Who are the partners who can help us execute that? What is the internal capacity we need to build in our own staff to be able to execute that? What do we need the teachers to be able to do? What do we need the headmasters to be able to do? What do we need the department to be able to do? So when you ask a question like that, a whole series of things emerge from that. Or we saw in COVID. I mean, the state completely collapsed during COVID. I mean, they had no clue what to do. They were nice people, but they just got overwhelmed. You have the government of India saying, "Oh, I alone know COVID. I alone will trace it. I alone will tell you whether you have COVID." But guess what? I don't have any instruments to do this. So, in a sense, you've got a situation where the state has abrogated or whatever, given itself a very large amount of powers that it's unable to exercise at all. And this is really the problem. In India, the capacity of the state to execute policy, design and execute policy is very important because the state has given itself so much power. When a state says, I will decide everything, you need to be able to at least decide. What has happened is that we've got a situation in which the state says, I'll do everything, but I really don't know how to do that. I mean, take public education. In Karnataka, 30-40% of children finish PUC. Clearly, whoever is in charge of public education is failing. I mean, if only 40% of the kids are getting past PUC. I mean, they will tell you it's 65-70%, but only 70% of the kids take the exam in the first place. So 65 to 70% of them pass, which is about 40% of the total. So if 4 out of 10 kids are passing school, then it's fair to say that your system, you're not really very good. You're just failing. On top of it, you have people going and saying that this kind of girl should not be allowed in school, that kind of boy should not be. So you have all those problems. So the bottom line in all this is to say, if the state has no capacity to design and execute a policy, it's simply going through the motions. And everybody can see it's going through them. It's like emperor's new clothes, right? Everyone can see that they can't do it, but they are in charge. And I remember once I went to a, there's lots of these conclaves that are held in the city for something or the other. And a very good friend of mine, who's an IAS officer, was one of the panelists. And after they had finished introducing him, it was my turn to speak, and I pointed out something. That if I said to the audience, here is Satya Shankar, that in the last 25 years he has held 17 jobs, and he's an expert in all of those, the audience would find that ludicrous. But if you introduce an IAS officer by saying that he's a very experienced officer, he's been in the last 25 years, he's been in 17 jobs, and he's widely experienced as a result of that, that is something that routinely happens in meeting after meeting, event after event, and no one says, how the hell is that possible? I'm sorry, it's just not possible, because in the real world, that's not how you build expertise. It may be that general administration is needed in the departments, and that's what those officers are called upon to be good at. But they're clearly not experts in. So
Sure.
in a sense, we have to reimagine state capacity. And the way to reimagine state capacity has to include a certain degree of expertise, has to include a certain degree of willingness to work with market and society. Those elements have to be woven in.
Coming back to the question of how we thought problems were being solved, clearly there are some policy schools which advocate a more market-led approach to solving problems. You and I know that markets can solve certain problems. Sometimes it's just solving for a greed, but collective action is usually a problem that they can't, which is what you adhere to. It's not about sponsoring a park, it's about understanding maybe extended producer responsibilities, looking at the larger framework and seeing how you can contribute to making the place better and making it better for everybody else other than just peddling your product, right? So that's one of the things that they should be putting money after from the market side. There are policy schools which seem to think government is the answer, and there is leanings on both sides. Different institutions come at it from different ways, but ultimately the bottom line is whether it is the market solving the problem or government solving the problem, the citizens are in the middle of it all, right? The choices are being made based on various pushes from either the governance or the products that are being peddled, and nobody is taking care of the problem, its definition, its solutions, and things like that. And one of the things you said is sometimes when the citizens get together or when you bring the society into the play, you need not be solving the problem. I wanted to understand what does that really mean. And you also said don't just give them tools, give them ways of thinking. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate how society can effectively participate in problem solving, just them as society?
It's not that I'm discounting the eventual need or the likelihood of someone going and trying to solve a problem. I'm not discounting them.
Yeah.
I'm saying when we are teaching policy, we should actually infuse that with a very high degree of teaching problem solving. Number one, right? I can teach you various approaches to thinking, making, and enacting policy, but I still have to teach you problem solving within a policy framework. And there are many frameworks now for thinking about wicked problems, complex problems in particular. What I guess what I mean by that is to say, look, let me tell you what we do in the course. So the course works like this. So students come and say, so the first part of the course is to say, okay, what's the problem that bothers you, that you think you'd like to solve? So people come and say, well, various things. Very good. Right? So now we say, okay, this is the problem. This is your class assignment. Right? The class assignment has 5 very specific things that you're supposed to do. Find out who are all working on this problem. Right? Now we're not going at the problem. We're saying find out who are all working on the problem. Get their inputs about the nature of the problem. Then you write down your assessment of the nature of the problem. Initially, you say, well, the bus is not coming to my neighborhood frequently enough. So that's the problem, right? So you say, who are all working on this problem? It could be the bus company. It could be some WRI type organization. It could be any number of people. Right? It could be your local politician. It could be anybody. Find all the people who are working on the problem, and you say, okay, fine. Talk to all of them. Now, imagine that. The very act of talking to all of them means you're not churning the waters a little. Right? And then what happens? You say, fine. Now, this seems to be the nature of the problem. The bus company needs 17,000 buses. They've got 6,400. They get 11 buses a month, typically, that they are able to add to something. They have demands from every part of the city to add new buses. They don't have a system in place for deciding where to optimally add buses. They don't have a system in place for rationally deploying those buses. In this chaos, it's very difficult for anybody to make a pitch for an additional bus in their neighborhood and get that thing to happen again. So you might come up with a problem statement like this if you talk to all the people who are doing something. And the bus company doesn't listen to the MLA or whatever. It could be any number of things. It doesn't listen to the corporator because the corporator is heard only in the municipality. All sorts of things, right? So now you got, this is the problem. Now you say, okay, fine. Once you talk to all the people and you come up with an assessment of the nature of the third step is to say, what can you do that they're not already doing? You know what I mean? As an instructor of the course, I'm not interested in somebody gathering information about what others are doing. In this city, I'm sure I know many of them myself. I don't need a student to gather that data and present it to me. So I tell the student, now tell what you can do that they're not already doing. But also think, there's a part 2 to that. Tell what you can do for a few of them, right? So Satya is trying to promote bicycling, so I say, fine, if bicycling is part of the answer, so you tell what you can do for Satya, right? If DULT is trying to sort of do some modal study, you come and tell what you can do for DULT. So essentially what you do is to say, I want to embed myself in the canvas of problem solving of that problem, and I'm going to make a beginning by saying there are all these people who are doing what they're doing. I'm first going to give strength to them. So you don't begin by imagining that you are out of the blue going to discover something in 14 days that other people haven't discovered in 14 years. It can happen, but it's rare, unlikely. What's more likely is that you can come up with something that for which more bandwidth is needed, more time is needed, and you can create those kinds of things. Maybe more money is needed someplace. I don't know. But you can say, I'm going to add myself to that framework, to that canvas. That's the third thing. And the fourth thing is, okay, go and try it. Take the first step. You say, this is what you can add, right? Go and take the first step. And the fifth thing is, come back to the class and present it, okay? And here's the beauty of it. The class then judges each other. So I pick one student at random, and they make the presentation, and that student picks one more student at random to assess them. And there is no assessment of whether the problem is solvable in this way, right? If they come up with a new way of doing something that they find they can do different, there's no credit for cleverness, innovation, nothing. That's a different class. You want to take that class, you go take that class with whoever is teaching innovation. In this class, you get credit for talking to lots of people, figuring out what they're doing, embedding yourself in the thing, adding value to what they are doing, and showing that some early steps have been taken. This is the class. This is problem solving, right? This is increasing the number of problem solving people without regard to whether they're actually going to solve the problem this way. Some will. There was one student who said, whatever, there's a lot of food waste in the university campus. So she said, okay, I'm going to work on it. She couldn't leave the campus for whatever reason during the semester and had to stay on campus. So she said, I'll work on a problem that's on campus. And she went and talked to the cafeteria people, the university people, the waste management people, the students themselves, and did some clever things like saying, well, if you make the plate size smaller, food waste will be lesser. Some proven things, and then some communication strategy, all of that stuff. But the issue, and eventually it did reduce food waste, right? But that's not the issue. In my class, she doesn't get any credit for reducing food waste. In my class, she gets credit for all the steps that she took to embed herself in the ecosystem of problems. And if you ask me, at the end of the course, a lot of students said they felt good that they had been exposed to this way of thinking about. Some of them even did their capstone projects on the same thing that they worked on it was a fifth semester class. So in the sixth semester, when they did capstone projects, it was easy for them to continue working on the same thing that they did in my class. So I think it's possible to sort of teach and expect demonstration of that learning from the students about problem solving. Just as you say, look, I'm going to test you on mathematics. I want to test you on the history of policy, all of those kind of things. You say, okay, I want to test you on willingness to embed yourself in an ecosystem of problem solving people and adding to that.
Embedding yourself in problem solving has become a big issue with many people because they are unable to understand how do I take the first step of understanding what can I contribute. It seems to be such a wide ocean of problems to be solved, and I am afraid of taking the first step. I have the passion. I like, for example, I just got off of a call with all the cyclists or the counselors of CFAM yesterday.
Yeah.
They had this issue of knowing how to contribute, what to contribute. It should, one of things I told them is come forward and embed yourself and offer certain things that you can do and figure out if it is strategic in nature to having this conversation, but do something. Like the fact that you said, what can you do? The emphasis on you. What can you do? And then the emphasis is on do as well. You have to do something. You cannot just sit there and give an idea and throw it out there and say, I'm done with my thing. Change making doesn't happen that way. You don't get to participate. You don't add to the number of problem solvers if you don't do, these kind of things. And somewhere when we talk about policy education, it is seen as, should I be a public policy wonk in order for me to solve problems? Of course, it is a prerequisite for people who understand the tools, like you said, the spanner, wrench, and everything, to also know how to use them. Right, that's what you're saying is a point of problem solving. But the embedding yourself in the framework is not just for policy students. How do we, of course, some of these policy courses are now available for general citizens to go and take and say, look, understand the interplay between state, market, and society, but those are just the spanners and the wrenches. Like you said, you need to start embedding yourself in problem solving. And I think there is scope for reaching this to wider set of people, because when I increase the number of problem solving people, I am having to do what you do and say, how do I engage them and give them the spanners and the wrenches and the tools, and then also tell them how to use that, how to embed yourself, what are the different small actionable things that you can do. I find that practically challenging to implement. What are your
So
thoughts on how?
one thing is that it helps if the university or the college that is teaching policy has hired its faculty with this intent. In a sense, I can't sort of not pay attention to it when I hire people and thereafter hope that it can somehow be infused into each of their courses. I would make that a significant filter. There's one university, I'm not going to say which one, there's one university which basically has told Socrates and myself and a few others, will you help with the hiring? And that's a good thing. And I said, look, we've got a budget to hire faculty, 3 new faculty for the next 5 years. There's guaranteed funding for this thing. Will you help with the hiring? So yeah, we'll help with the hiring. And if we help with the hiring, then we say we teach these courses in public problem solving. And we work with each of those faculty to say, how do we embed elements of this approach in their courses too? Right? So in some sense, they're teaching whatever, Weberian thought or whatever kind of thing. And how do you then say, fine, how do you push a problem solving element into that? Or they are teaching, market regulation in India, or the competition commission, or the competition and market regulation. So how do you embed that with something? So each of the courses that are taught by other people, how do you embed that? with something. And I think the one part of this is schools do realize that getting practitioners to come and teach is helping. That's one. Certainly, they're doing some of that. There are even schools that are sort of making do substantially with practitioners coming and teaching and not really full-time faculty. Although some of that will change over time. But I think the key is to say that you can't have this DNA woven into your teaching program if you haven't woven it into the hiring in the first place. And hiring not just the faculty, but hiring the leadership too.
Mm-hmm.
But when you set up the public policy school, you've got to say, well, I want to be conscious that whatever the school does, it adds to the universe of public problem solving. And therefore, I set up the school in a certain way, the dean in a certain way, the director in a certain way, the space in a certain way. I choose the location in a certain way. I choose the faculty in a certain way. And I build the courses in a certain way. So all of that then comes to, and in some sense, that's starting to happen because some of the pioneers of that space are starting to occupy leadership positions in some of the better schools. And so you can now say, for now, there's an opportunity to go and do it in this way.
No, I just want to pick up on the key point of actually increasing the number of problem solvers and teaching them problem solving at depth, which I thought was a very key point. But you've answered most of my question. The first one, which was just what does a modern public problem solving framework look like, which is quite an aside from how policy education coursework would look like in a traditional school. You've spoken about that. But what I was wondering, taking the stance of a student, and let's just say someone who is interested in a public policy program and is a problem solver, how do I evaluate without being in a school? How do I evaluate a school as to if it has the framework that you mentioned of like deep involvement in a particular problem and problem thinking, and how would that go?
Well, there are two possibly answers to that, two, maybe even three. So let's say you want to go to a good engineering school. How do you decide which are the good engineering schools? There are some answers to that. Some people have gone and figured out which are the better engineering schools. Some people have published lists of which are the better engineering schools. Each of those schools has faculties whose names are published publicly. You figure out what they're interested in and whether those interests match your own. There's a whole sort of universe of information that you can draw from to answer that question. There's a smaller universe for public policy education because the education itself is new. So if you're an aspiring student and you want to figure out, where should I go if this is what I want to do? That's not an easy thing to answer. But in some sense, it is possible to think of yourself as a consumer too, that if you are in an interview to be admitted as a student at a college, and they're asking you 7 questions, typically a good admissions panel will also invite the student to ask some questions somewhere. The student should say, do you teach problem solving, right? In a sense, that has to, if you're expecting the institution to do something, well, you should ask whether they do it directly. And this is the best way to find it in some sense. And it's a good thing to do because the institutions and their administrators also hear this from the aspiring student bodies themselves. That's one. But that said, I think there's, Satya asked earlier a question about people sort of being phased a little bit by the size and complexity of problems. I did a small 90-second podcast series. It's on my website. It's called the Problem Solving Society. So there are 5 or 6 things there. One is to say that, one part is to say we need to increase the number of problem solving people. And then you say, okay, how do I increase the number of problem solving people? And so I come to you and say, Neerav, okay, you need to increase the number of problem solving people. You say, what on earth does that mean? What is the easiest way to increase the number of problem solving people? The easiest way to say is to say, I'm going to be one of them. If you say, I'm going to be one of them, there's a +1. Now you might. So in some sense, by choosing to be +1, you're increasing the number of problem solving people, potentially, right? Now the question is, people become phased. I think a lot of people are willing to say +1. They put up their hands and say, I'd like to be. But then they quickly start to second guess themselves. They say, what can I alone do, right? Or they say, I would like to get started, but I don't know how to get started, right? I would like to get started, or but I need to find someone who's willing to do this with me. These are very common sort of, in some sense, hurdles that people erect in front of their own paths. And they see these as not hurdles they have erected themselves, but they see these as hurdles that already exist. So that's really the challenge. But it's not that difficult either. I mean, no matter where you live in this city, within 200 meters of your house, you can find somebody who's trying to solve some problem or the other. I'm certain of it. Okay. And if you can't find somebody within 200 meters of your house, you ask me, I'll point you to somebody within. I know lots of people who are trying to solve problems in the city. I don't think that itself is the problem. The thing you should not do is to say, what can I alone do? And like I said, once you find the guy who lives within 200 meters of your house, or the lady who's close by, you have to go there and say, I remember there was this, it's very many years ago. I must have been a teenager at that time. Right? And either my mom or my dad said to me, well, here's this thing down the street. Go there, find out what they need. You understand? In a sense, that's all it takes. You go to some institution that you like, who's doing something that you like, and go there and say, okay, I'm here to help. Tell me how I can help. Right? Maybe call this volunteering. You can call it that if you want to. I just think of it as plain neighborliness. You just go down the street, find somebody who's doing something useful, and say, well, how can I help? And therefore, to embed yourself in the efforts of other people is trivial. It's trivial. You tell me the problem, I'll point you to somebody, go to their house, factory, office, whatever, and say, I want to help. How can I help? And I guarantee that somebody who's serious in working on these problems will find something. Somebody wrote to me last night saying, I know you're working on this livability initiative. I'd like, some young niece of mine to intern with you. So I don't know what she can do, can't do, but here's a way to get started. Right? You can think of something, or somebody in your organization, some group can think of something. So I don't think that's the problem. The second thing that people second guess themselves about is to say, how will my little contribution ever add up to anything?
I've heard that.
That's actually a mistake, because it's only those things that ever add up at all in some sense. Right? I mean, if you're not a government especially, I think you have to say that in some sense. So I'll tell you why all these things are important. If you ask yourself, what is development? Right? Most people will say development, they've got standard frameworks to answer that. 5.5% or greater GDP growth per year is development. Reduction in poverty, absolute poverty, is development. Increasing enrollment in schools is development. Longevity in lifespans is development. All of that is fair. But I don't think all of those things by themselves can be called development. The Chinese have a lot of this. So, but you wouldn't say, well, I want to go to a developed place, so I'm going to go to China for these reasons, right? I think development is a balance between state, market, and society. Development is not the result of that balance. Development is not the work that gets done because of that balance. That balance itself is development. If your society, if your country does not have a balance between state, market, and society as drivers of change, then you can't be developed.
That's a great point.
Yeah, if you think about it this way, it's easy to see why Saudi Arabia is not developed. They're rich, but they're not developed. There is no balance between state and society. If you think about it this way, you can see why China isn't, why Singapore is only partially developed. All the things that you sort of ascribe to the meaning of that word development, right? So if you think about it like this, you'll come to those answers in a different way. And that's what I think we should educate more people to be comfortable with. And by that yardstick, a purely market-driven program is also not anything to be proud of. A purely state-driven program, I mean, the Soviet Union failed because of the lack of this balance. Right? Because they essentially bet the whole farm on imbalance, and it was doomed to fail from the beginning.
I think that's a very useful point to kind of understand and articulate to most people. But I want to come back to saying, how do we make public policy education? Because it seems to be geared towards public affairs or a job of lobbying for a corporate company or being in MP's office. Those are good things to do. You need to ultimately write policies. But don't you think policy writing is not the only thing that public policy entails? Like you said, if it needs this balance between all three pillars of the democracy, as you call it, and getting our freedoms and keeping it in balance, it requires a bunch of people to be solving problems on the ground. And a lot of that has to come from citizens and people who are not necessarily looking at public policy as a step to a job, which could be public affairs or a lobbyist or whatever else that is there. How do you look at that frame? Where do you see the future of policy education vis-a-vis public problem solving or whatever else, you know?
Yeah. Okay, let's start from something. So I say to you, Satya, go and reduce the carcinogenic content of tobacco in cigarettes. Okay, that's the assignment. You're gonna turn around and say, "Are you mad? Like, what the hell am I supposed to be able to do about that? I'm not. I have zero expertise in reducing the carcinogenic. You know what I mean? I don't know the science. I can't do the research. Also, if I said that to myself, also it would be the same thing. I would say, "Are you mad?" Right? There are lots of assignments that one could give to ourselves or to others, and they would say, "How the hell do you expect me to do that? I'm not good at that." But then you get into all these social problems, and I say, "Okay, fine. Go and increase more shares of walkability in your neighborhood," and people think they ought to be able to do that. That anyone can do that, right? So no, not anyone can do that either. Just like not anyone can reduce the carcinogenic content in cigarettes, not anyone can go and figure out how to build a world-class footpath. It may seem a little easier, but I used to jokingly say, only half joking, say, that it's actually easier to work at NASA than to work at with BBMP. The complexity is much harder if you're working at BBMP than if you work with a science program in some sense. And the reasons are manifold. So, in a sense, we shouldn't thrust upon ourselves or others the expectation that public problems that they identify can be solved merely out of interest and persistence, right? I'm never going to be good at solving the transportation problem merely out of persistence and interest. First, I've got to know what some of the solutions are, right? And why those solutions are the solutions, right? It's like when we did direction orientation 10, 12 years ago, when we did the Big Ten bus. You and I have heard of transit orientation in some way. It seems logical that cities should be transit oriented. It's obvious that the MTC's fleet is not transit oriented after that's been pointed out to you. It's clear that all the TTMCs have been put in the wrong locations, do not serve transit orientation. All of that is obvious to you after somebody has educated you about transit orientation and direction orientation. So the first thing, if you're trying to be a problem solver in a certain domain, is to say that I'm not merely going to learn from another person. I'm going to be an ally to another person who has the expertise to do this. You understand? It's not the same thing, and this is the same mistake that we have made in government. Right? We expect an IAS officer to simply learn from another person and be able to sort of say, I'm just going to absorb what some other guy knows, and now I can be a leader of this department. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to work with that other person to solve that problem. They've built that expertise, and that expertise has nuance. Right? The nuance is not obvious to most people. You won't know quantum mechanics if all you depend on is observation and teaching of classical mechanics in schools. So in a sense, I feel you have to come up with the right balance between learning and being an ally of someone who is actually knowledgeable in that sector. So there are lots of people who add this knowledge value. How do you make yourself an ally of theirs, and how do you make them an ally of yours? If you create that thing, so if you see now in the city, if you want to get done, if you want some technical thing to get, so there's these 4 words, right? Technical, managerial, social, political. Most public problems are social and political. Most of the tools are technical and managerial. So the technical and managerial things do have a space. You have to gather them, but you don't need to gather them by saying that you're going to learn the technical and managerial things. you're going to say that you're going to create opportunities for people who have those skills to be in positions where they can apply those skills directly. So the key is what? You go to BMTC and say, I want you to think about rationalization of bus routes. You don't know how to do rationalization of bus routes. I'll get you somebody who will do that, sit with you, work with you in A, doing it the first time, and B, teaching your own people how to do it as well. In the process, you're improving the state's capacity, you're increasing the number of problem solvers within the institution, and you learn a few things. I mean, I learned one thing from Madhav Pai many years ago, right, which is bus utilization. I mean, a lot of these things are clever because they strike you as, oh, I should have thought of that after somebody has said it to you. But of course, there's a reason why it didn't strike you first. So we wanted to see how much buses on a certain route were being used. The idea was that was very simple. Go stand at the bus stop, make observations, note down how full each bus is. And then you say, okay, fine, let's get some transport planning kids to go make this observation. But if you need transport planning kids to make this observation, you're not going to be able to scale it to be citywide. Right? You need to be able to, and this is an important part of public problems. Public problems depend upon large numbers of people being able to do small bits and pieces of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And for that, you have to reduce the data collection in part to easily observable metrics. Right? So if I say, and this is what we did with the neighborhood indices subsequently in MapUnity as well. So what we did with the buses was simple. You go to a bus stop, you stand at the bus stop, you wait for the bus to come. And you note down one of 7 or 8 possibilities. That's all it is. It is empty, 1/4 sitting, half sitting, 3/4 sitting, full sitting, 1/4 standing, half standing, 3/4 standing, full standing. These are the only possibilities, right? Broadly. I mean, of course, there are various intermediate percentages, but this is an observation that a layman can make, right? Like, and then when we started doing neighborhood indices, we say go to a street and you say, okay, look, the space for footpaths does not exist. The space for footpath exists, but a footpath does not exist. A footpath exists, but it's not walkable. A walkable footpath exists. Any ordinary person can make this observation in half a second, and he can say, this is what it is on the left-hand side of the road, this is what it is on the right-hand side of it. If your neighborhood has 40 streets, you can ride all of these 40 streets in 2 hours, note this observation down, and come up with a neighborhood level index for walkability in no time. Neerav's actually done this exercise, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just walkability. Now you can do this for street lighting. You can do this for any number of things that the ordinary person can observe. And when ordinary people take data, they feel they're beginning to contribute. And this is an important thing. People who take data are contributing. And data is something that lots of people can take. So you can say at Uru Labs, we will create a framework for data collection at the neighborhood level. So you take all the things in our indices program and say, you want to see how good your neighborhood is. Collect all this data, write it down, and it'll be obvious how good your neighborhood is. And a lot of people have the instinct to do this. It's not that difficult. If I plunk you in the middle of the city somewhere, some random place in the city, you may not be able to tell where you are, but you'll be able to tell whether it's a reasonably wealthy neighborhood or a middle-class neighborhood or a middle-income neighborhood or a low-income neighborhood fairly quickly. Because you're used to certain other metrics. You see how close the properties are. You see how narrow the road is. You know, things that give you other indications of the kind of neighborhood that you are in. And I feel, therefore, that lots of people can become data collectors on behalf of a public purpose, especially for things like mobility. It's harder to collect income data. It's harder to collect cost data. It's harder to collect certain kinds of data. But I think there's a lot of data that ordinary people can collect.
I think that's a very positive way to kind of bring this to a close. I'd like to mention to the viewers that I'll leave links to Ashwin's website and his LinkedIn profile in the show notes, so you can get in touch with him if you need to either volunteer or intern or even understand the course he's teaching and where he's teaching at. He can privately tell you how you can be a part of that. Parting thoughts, Ashwin, on the state of public policy education and how much it needs to scale quickly. Is it where it is? Is it good? Do you see a lot of improvements, or just introducing such niche things like public problem solving might be fruitful?
It's got one thing going for it, which is noteworthy. Employers are starting to think that an MPP is an acceptable alternative to an MBA.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, not many initially, but clearly. I don't think, partly this is the fault of the MBA program. But so in that sense, you know,
They set themselves up.
yeah, maybe the bar is too low. If employers see the MPP program as an acceptable alternative to the MBA, then it opens up a much larger canvas of possibilities for employment for the students also. So perhaps there's room for a program that is partly infused with sociology, partly infused with business teaching, and partly infused with technology. I'm just trying to think, what are all these other master's programs in which you can go and learn various things, and say, is there a like specialization program, MPP for business, MPP for nonprofits, MPP for Sarkar? In a sense, one could begin to imagine specializations. And somebody who's specialized in business and is in an MPP program could possibly be as good as, or potentially even better than, an MBA student. Because the canvas of thought is wider. That's the huge advantage. I mean, even for those who are taking these certificate courses or year-long non-university courses, the canvas of thought is much wider. And therefore, an employer ought to value that. Someone coming into the program has had training and exposure to a wider canvas of thought. So I see that as one arena in which the MPP has a strength relative to something that's already widely accepted, and pays well in the marketplace. The second, the biggest difficulty is the absence of lateral induction in government. That's really the problem. Sarkar doesn't hire anybody other than kids. And that is a mistake. That in a sense, we have to have a program in government of hiring people with 10, 15, 20 years of experience, not as contractors, not as part-time consultants, not in temporary positions, but in government itself. You can do that through 5-year terms, like the army does that. Some of the services do that. They tried some experiments with this in the central level. But it's not what I mean. There are risks of vested interest capture in some of these kinds of things. But that said, as long as we close the door of employment to those with expertise and experience in the private sector, yeah, so there is going to be a problem. The other thing is that government in India is very small. And I know people think, oh, well, these guys, the existing governments are creating so much havoc. You want to expand the number of people in government. Yes, the existing government is very small. The number of police is incredibly small. The number of municipal staff. India is overstaffed for the wrong things and understaffed for the right things. And Karthik Muralidharan sort of written extensively about this. There are people who sort of studied this problem. We have a staffing problem in government, right? And we also don't have clear separation of regulation and public service delivery. So the education department is the largest deliverer of education and also the regulator of education.
Yeah.
But it doesn't regulate itself. It regulates only the other deliverers of
Rowing and
education.
steering at the same ship.
It's rowing and steering at the same thing. So, but that separation, if it happens, then the government would be under greater obligation to perform. And when they're under greater obligation to perform, they'll welcome private input more. Today, they're not under greater obligation to perform because they are evaluating themselves. The minute you separate regulation and say, okay, there is an education regulatory authority, it will regulate all schools, private, public, on various metrics, and even the public ones will be regulated. That's really what it is. That in a sense, you have to create about 10% of the jobs in government have to be mainly to police the other 90%. And they should be only for that purpose. They should not be also for that purpose.
Yeah.
The advantage of giving the Lokayukta all the anti-corruption cases is that nobody in the Lokayukta is ever going to go work in any other department. Maybe some of the cops will, but you know what I'm saying? That in a sense, it has to be somebody's job to point out all the wrong things. And that person should not have any other job.
Makes sense.
Once you create 10 roles like that, they'll go around pointing to various things that are wrong, which then have a chance of being addressed.
All right. So with that thought, I'd like to deep dive one day on the bureaucratic revival, right? And all the things that we have observed over time and apply it to seeing how we can transform governance because a
I
lot
want
of
to say one thing on this thing. A lot of public
yeah,
policy students are going into these government internships, right? The chief minister's fellowship for
right,
this or
right.
that, right? This is one place where a lot of people end up. And maybe this is one thing, this can be the sort of the last thing that we talk about, which is to say, what happens when you graduate from a public policy school? Right? I mean, one set of people, we said they go into corporate lobbying jobs. But another set of people go into these kinds of sarkari
Yes, I mentioned that. Yeah,
apprenticeships and
correct.
internships or that kind of thing, right?
A fellow of the MP's office or
Yeah.
something like
So
that.
the overwhelming majority of those are, to put it bluntly, pointless.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think government is going to get better by these kinds of add-ons to itself.
Mhm.
It's like, they remember they've been talking about public-private partnerships for donkey's years. Public-private partnership has just become a clever way of outsourcing things. The government's capacity never seems to improve as a result of that partnership. It's clear
Mhm.
what, it's clear what the public is getting, that is, the people are getting. It's clear what the private entity is getting, but it's not clear what the government is getting in that. Its capacity has to increase. So also the government's capacity, and that's why I said having the correct metric for the government is important. Right?
Mhm.
If you say that we are going to get into a PPP with somebody, is it going to accelerate adoption of some good thing? Is it going to increase the number of problem solving people? Is it going to increase the capacity of the government to design and execute policy itself? On that last question, you'll get a zero.
Yep.
So that's what tells you that this is not a good approach. So in some sense, in my way of thinking about PPP means private knowledge, public manpower.
Mhm.
So people like you go to a government department and say, I'll bring you private knowledge, but then your people are going to do it. Right? That's a different kind of PPP. It builds capacity in the government. So I feel these attachments to departments are not really working. They're excusing bureaucrats from doing what they should be doing. Some ministers like it because it makes the minister look like he's doing something, which also is sort of, we have very low thresholds of that as well. And in some sense, it sort of bypasses constitutional and legal frameworks for accountability when you do things in this way. And all of us have sort of been borderline on that. I say it with full knowledge of that. But I think being paid for it makes it a very different
Yeah.
thing. That's one. I think people should learn to engage with government as citizens, not as contractors, not as consultants, not as quasi employees. But first, you should learn to engage with government as citizens. And after that, you can
Yeah.
sort of think of all of these other things. So, one point to make is that those kinds of programs are not working. But I do recommend one thing for policy students.
Mm.
Don't take a if at all possible, don't take a job immediately after you graduate. Spend some time trying something. Essentially, take this idea of embedding yourself in a problem-solving ecosystem and do that for 3 or 4 problems for a few months, ideally for a year. We've set up this fellowship in public problem solving, right? Which is a year-long fellowship. Gives you money simply to go and try 5-6 things
Mm.
and see
Get
which
paid
one
to
of
do
those things
things.
interests you. Yeah, and in the
Mm.
process of trying 5-6 things, you meet people. Your network gets better. Your capacity to find the job that you like will get better. Your capacity to curate for yourself that kind of job will also get better. All of this gets better. So, if at all possible, post graduation, you should give yourself a few months to try to figure out what really interests you, what really you feel you can contribute to, and see if you can find a position that allows you to do that. You don't really lose a lot by giving up a few months early in your career if it
Yeah.
helps you get started on the right thing. I realize that not all families have the luxury of making that choice, so I don't mean to forget that. But at the same time, uh,
As
it is
many as
possible.
possible. Yeah. With that, I think both of us have the option, both myself and Ashwin offer the option of people coming and trying things out. And Nirav has been a big beneficiary of that. He's tried lots of things under his belt.
Yeah.
We open that up. And with that, I'd just encourage people to like, subscribe, and share and keep watching this space for more interesting conversation. We'll come back with Ashwin on the bureaucracy thing and a separate session. Thank you, Ashwin, for being on the show, and see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you, Satya. It's very nice to be on the show.